Hi everybody, meteorologist Joe Cioffi. Let me just get centered here. On this Friday, March 9th, 2018, 6 o'clock Eastern Time. I hope everybody had a great day. I have to tell you right off the bat, I was kind of hoping that I would just come in today and this would be sort of a straightforward going out to sea with the next storm system that has the potential of being the third coastal storm in 10 days. I was hoping that that was going to be the case, but sadly, I'm not going to get that wish. Looks like more and more as we get every model run that comes out that, well, at the very least, we're going to have to pay attention. And, you know, look, at this point, I can tell you this. I'm thinking that of the three storms, this one will probably be the weakest, quote-unquote, of the three, the way things are looking at the moment. But I guess it probably would be safe not to take anything off the table at this point. Well, what we can tell you is that at least through the Sunday and into the first part of Monday, things look relatively calm and quiet. Now, I want to go back to yesterday. I brought up this graphic here so we could see, you know, all the moving parts that are in play. And you've got a lot of puzzle pieces here. You have the block that is sitting in northeastern Canada, where I have the word high written in it, and because of that high being in that position, the jet stream is displaced further south, and you can pretty much, you can see it pretty well here, running off the Pacific through the southwest and then into the eastern states, and we have some energy moving along it. South of the high over Nova Scotia, Newfoundland, is Wednesday's storm, which is still sitting there, and that is, I think, of all the keys that we have to look for to this next situation, that is probably the most important key at the moment, because while it is sitting there, there really isn't any room for a system to lift up the East Coast. But the question is that going to pull out just enough so that you've got northern and southern stream energy here coming into play from the Great Lakes down to the central Gulf states. If that storm pulls out a little bit further to the east, it would allow for some room. And we've got a ridge out in the west, a very strong positive Pacific North America index, positive PNA, with the ridge in the western part of the U.S. So this is the big question here, is that low going to get out of the way, because the block is there, you know, everything is there. And this may be another situation where we have to be careful with models that they may trend west and closer to the coast with each and every run. Now, I'll take you to today's European, which will bring you a little bit closer. That map was, by the way, for Sunday night. Okay, here's a close-up view of Monday morning on the jet stream pattern. And it goes to what I've been saying, you know, with regards to there being room. You can see the pieces here, the northern stream energy coming into the western lakes, the southern stream energy that's indicated by the line that I have drawn from eastern Tennessee, southwestward, east of New Orleans. That's the southern energy. The storm, the old storm, is on the edge of this picture, east of Nova Scotia, close to Newfoundland, and you've got this weak ridge offshore. So if we move through time, you can kind of visualize that trough trying to do something. Is it going to kick this southern stream feature out to the northeast separately, in which case you'll take a low that'll develop right along or just off the South Carolina coast and probably run out east-northeast and be of no consequence. Honestly, I hope that is the case, because I am so mentally fried and tired right now. I don't want to have to deal with it. But in some ways, I have to tell you, this kind of reminds me in some ways of the same dilemma that we had back in early January. It's a bit different, but because we didn't have any blocking at the time, but it's similar in that we've had this northern trough trying to lift up some southern energy, and as I recall, the models kind of kept them separate until we were very, very tight inside the short range, at which point it just pulled it back westward just enough that it became a problem, and a big problem for coastal areas, with some places getting 1 foot to 1.5 foot of snow. I'm not saying that that's going to be the outcome this time around, but you get the idea here that all it takes is a little bit of phasing and a little bit of timing, and models out 4 days ahead are not exactly going to be in sync with their timing at this point. And it could be the other way too. I mean, ultimately we could wind up with a squash scenario, but let's take a look. I want to show you the new late afternoon run of the GFS, because this really kind of illustrates what could happen. Okay, and remember, could happen, should happen, and will happen are always 3 different things. By the way, I'm hoping that I'm not going to experience the technical difficulties that we had yesterday. There are still power outages here and service interruptions. It seems to be a bit better today, so let's hope that that is the case. I'm going to start wide, and we're going to bring up the upper air, because you'll be able to see very well what I'm talking about with these pieces coming together as we take a look at the 18Z run of the GFS. So we'll let the maps load here for you. We're starting at 6 hours, which is this evening. Don't forget, by the way, clocks go ahead an hour on Sunday, but you got that finger that's pointing into northeastern Canada. That is a strong ridge. The block that we were talking about, the upper low in the Gulf of Maine, representing our storm from Wednesday. You can see the energy that's up in the northwest and off the west coast in the Gulf of Alaska. Remember, with the first nor'easter a week ago, we had that deep trough in the west, but the block was so powerful that it basically functioned on its own. Now, with a trough in the Gulf of Alaska, you're going to have a tendency to want to build a ridge inland of the west coast. Now, we'll bring it through. This is Sunday afternoon, and now we are into Monday. And you can see the troughs here, the southern stream energy from eastern Kentucky southwestward into Louisiana. You can see that the upper low that's near Newfoundland now, it's pulled a little bit further to the east. The upper high, the blue blocking high, that's in northeastern Canada. And that northern and southern system getting closer and closer, the ridge in the west. Now, watch what happens here. I'll show you this on a tighter view in a second, but you can see that northern energy is trying to get involved as that southern energy kicks eastward, and then it tries to lift it up. See that little circle there that's east of the New Jersey coast? That's the representation of this coastal low in the upper atmosphere. It's trying to lift up that southern shortwave northward, making the trough go negative, northeast, northwest, southeast. Strong ridge powers up inland of the west coast. The blocking high is still kind of holding firm there in northeastern Labrador, and there you have it. Now here's the tighter view. We'll bring up the U.S. Regional map, and you'll see the tighter view. Actually, I'll go even into the eastern U.S. Whoops, missed that. There we go. Okay, so this is this was late for this afternoon. So watch now. There's that our system in the Gulf of Maine moves over Nova Scotia, kind of sits there as we go through the weekend, barely moves because of the blocking. Here comes that southern stream system, and now here comes that northern energy dropping in, and then it just tries to lift it up there. It actually, on the GFS, it sort of ejects it out, the upper low out to the east. But you've got this northern trough getting involved, so the way the model sees this on the surface is that it has a low pulled back on the western edge of this, and the surface map will display this. This is how it'll play out at the surface. So this is Saturday afternoon. We go into Sunday night. Low pressure in eastern Tennessee. We've got weakness pressure weakness along and just off the southeast coast, where your secondary low is going to develop. Now, initially it wants to take that low out to the east, but notice that bagged isobar back to the west. So there's probably another low here. That's a reflection of that northern energy coming down, and as a result, it bulges out precip back along the mid-Atlantic coast into southern New Jersey, and then it just kind of lifts all that moisture up to the northeast. Now look, here's the thing. If this is literally correct, the main intensification with this storm and the deepening is going to be pretty far out. It does have a wide circulation, and the western edge of the precipitation goes back to the coast. It's not producing a lot, unlike what happened on Wednesday, for example, and what happened with the nor'easter last Friday, where we had, very large precip amounts. This one is producing much less. So if we put the total precip on the map, and we'll run it forward, you'll notice that it's basically half an inch over Long Island and over central and eastern Long Island, touching the New Jersey coast, with lesser amounts as you go to the west. The bulk of the heavy precip is going to be offshore based on this model's literal interpretation. I have to tell you honestly, at least from the standpoint of the GFS, it's done this on and off the last couple of days with regards to this system. I don't know that this is going to time out this way. You got to get these short waves to basically hit their bullseyes at specific points, and the model did it on this run. That does not necessarily mean that it will do it on the next one. Now, I'm also going to pull up the day run Canadian model, which was actually pretty interesting too. A same idea when we look at what the Canadian did with its upper low structure and the jet stream structure with this next system. If I can get that jet stream, there we go. We'll come back to present time. And the Canadian itself also tries. There's the southern stream. Here comes the north, and it catches it and it actually dives down that whole northern energy into Pennsylvania and New Jersey. Big large upper low there that moves over Long Island by the time we get to late Tuesday. And in terms of the surface, it kind of had a near miss with the coast getting grazed. You can see it there. The coast gets grazed. Now, even though the atmosphere is cold aloft, if you don't get the intent, you're going to need some dynamic cooling here to cool down the bottom of the atmosphere to some degree. So if you don't really get the precip intensity, you're not going to get a whole lot in terms of snow. But this is also a situation where models are probably not going to see this very well until we get into the short range. The NAM right now is not useful for us because it's really toward the end of its period of 72, 84 hours. So I would just kind of wait with regards to what the NAM may show with all this. We may have to wait until at least tomorrow evening, if not maybe on Sunday, to get the NAM involved, because we all know, of course, the NAM is front and center with whatever it does. We're going to pay a lot of attention to it. I just pulled the GFS model back out because I wanted at least take a look at what's going on elsewhere around the country, where it is basically quiet. Have a lot of snow shower activity going on across upstate New York and New England on the backside of the old storm from Wednesday. Looks like we'll probably get some showers and a few thunderstorms in the central Gulf states on Saturday and again on Sunday, moving into the eastern Gulf and southeast as the low begins its approach. Notice ridge in the west, so that means some calm weather in the western part of the United States until that ridge breaks down later next week, and then we start to get some action with systems coming in off the west coast. And you can see a couple of waves here toward the end of next week, and actually it's had it for several runs. I've noticed it has a fairly wet storm approaching California later next week, and then dropping southeastward with some substantial rains and snows there. In the longer range, not 100% sure yet. I would like to think that we're going to be done with one of these. It still wants to do something there late in the period. The teleconnection signals are kind of interesting going forward. They're not strong. They're not off the wall like they were for during the of course, during the winter months, and then we had these off the wall readings going into late February, early March that set up what we had. The number readings that we're getting are not quite down into the minus 200 range, which is strong, but you can see that strong PNA rising up to its peak on the 12th and 13th of March. So that would be Monday, Tuesday, I believe. Today is the 9th. Yeah, so Monday, Tuesday. The NAO is negative, so the North Atlantic Oscillation, the measure of blocking, negative. The more negative it is, the stronger the block. Still stays somewhat negative, kind of trends to the neutral line, but then sort of straddles the neutral line on the negative side right through the next 2 weeks. The EPO is kind of interesting because the EPO, the East Pacific Oscillation, goes pretty quickly to neutral by Sunday and then goes negative for much of all of next week and beyond. So that is at least telling us that there will be colder than normal air coming into the into Canada and into the Northeast. Although it's not Arctic in origin, it is going to be cooler than normal, but it's not going to be, for you cold weather lovers, it's not going to be anything to write home about. I want to very fast take a look at what's happening in Europe. I did happen to notice that winter has kind of shut off a little bit over now that the whole Siberian action of the cold air from Siberia has played itself out. The pattern has gone back to something a bit more typical as we move into the middle part of March, and as we run it through, there's a pretty big storm there in the Atlantic, heading northeast of Portugal and then running northward toward the English Channel. But there's no cold air to speak of, so this is going to be mostly a rain affair moving into early next week. And then a bit of a break, and then another strong storm, rainstorm that approaches Ireland along about Wednesday, and then sweeps up northward. But notice, by the way, there's not a whole lot of snow going on here at this stage of the game, so things seem to be a bit more normalized. I'll pull the snow map up, and you'll notice, except for northernmost Scotland, there's hardly any snow at all going on in the UK. And we've got snow basically limited to the colder areas in the mountains in Italy, Switzerland, and then back over into Eastern Europe. So the pattern, at least, has shut off. The Siberian air is shut off now. So at the very least, temperatures in Europe are going to be close to average. So if you snow lovers in Ireland and England that might be looking for another round of blizzard conditions, you're not going to get them out of this, and time is very, very quickly running out. So, as I said, we've got quite a bit to look at here as we go into the weekend. I wanted a break so badly, but just not going to get it. Marquise Vincent, haven't seen you in a while. Good to see you here. Reaver 501, dropping southeastward in a westerly flow. The Gulf is closed for business. They're moisture starved usually. Oh, I guess you're referring to the system that's coming down from the north. Yeah, and that southern stream system is there. That's going to tap some Gulf moisture. But ultimately, it's going to be whatever it does when it gets along the Atlantic. I don't. You can't believe that I'm rooting against snow. I'm being a little self-serving from that standpoint because I'm tired and I want it to go away. Jason Schaefer, the block going away anytime soon. The North Atlantic Oscillation blocking signature does weaken after early next week. So I'm thinking that the weather beyond that is probably just going to be, let's call it quiet. If we wind up with a third nor'easter in 10 days, I have been trying to rack my brains, trying to remember that happening. I know in 1978, Joe Rayo pointed this out, and I remember this, is that we did have three coastal systems going into the January 20th blizzard, we had actually had 3 of them in 8 days. So the idea of having 3 important weather events in 8 days is not unheard of. But I was trying to think in the recent past, maybe in the last 10 or 15 years, I really have to go back and look at the stats. My memory is not serving me well at this point. And out to sea, I think one of the things that we've learned this winter, by the way, is that you can't write any of these things off. You'd like to write them off early, but we've had example after example after example of that is not a smart forecast thing to do at this point. And by the way, if you go to the Weather Prediction Center on weather.gov and look at in their winter weather section, the heavy snow discussion, they are acknowledging this possibility, pointing to the fact that the Euro ensembles were to the left. So were the Canadian ensembles, by the way. In fact, I'm going to show you that. That was interesting when I saw that earlier this afternoon. Let me bring up the Canadian ensembles. I'm going to pull up the plot, and we'll bring that up to the top here. And let's get the gaps up. By the way, I haven't said this for a long time. Levi Cowan, Tropical Tidbits, tropicaltidbits.com, the go-to site for all your models. Definitely the go-to site. I'm going to pull up the surface plots on the gaps. It'll show you where all the members of the of the ensembles, where they are putting the surface low. And as we move it along, and we're heading now into Monday night and Tuesday, you can see where they're all clustered. I mean, actually a vast majority of these members are all left of 70 degrees west, and some of them are pretty deep. You actually don't have a lot of, you have only a couple that are way out. Virtually all of them are in a position where they would be problematic for the coastal areas. One thing I will say, unless this thing really surprises and it phases so far west that it comes way left, that this would probably be something that would impact more the coast and not be as widespread as the Wednesday storm was. So I don't want to say that. I say that with a fair degree of confidence, but with given what the GFS did late this afternoon, I don't know if the new GFS ensemble run is in. This is the old. Is this the 18Z? I believe it is. It looks like it is. I'm just having a little trouble seeing it. Yes. Notice that the GFS ensembles, even though its operational run is on the western edge of the cluster here, the vast majority of the ensembles on the GFS are pretty far out. Although now you notice here, this is along 70. There's a bunch of members that are along 70 when we get to Tuesday morning. So here's the old. I'm going to just compare this to the old one 6 hours ago. So that's the GFS ensemble plot right now, and here's the old one. So actually, if you look at the new one, the new one's got a whole bunch of them clustered, along or just east of 70 degrees west. So I would say that if this winds up going to the left, unless it really phased and goes well left, what we're looking at here is a threat for coastal areas and not necessarily for areas inland. In fact, it might be confined to just the immediate coast. That's also a possibility. And once you go west of New York City, you might wind up with very little. But you know what? I guess the fair thing to acknowledge here at this point is that given what we have had and have seen through most of this winter, we are going to keep our mind completely open on the possibilities going forward. 70 degrees for Franklin Taylor, where you are in Arkansas. Oh, would I like to see that. I am so itching to go fishing locally, and it's just too cold. at this point. Let's see. Is there any cold air, or is it all dynamics again? There is some cold air. That the block is supplying some cold Canadian air. It's not Arctic air, so it's not anything crazy cold, but it's cold enough. It's certainly as cold, or it might even be a bit colder this time around than it was on Wednesday. We can take a look at that. I'll bring it back up because we do have some time tonight. So let's see. I didn't get a chance to, I try to look as much as I can look before I come on with you guys, but I don't always get around to it. That's the 5,000. That's roughly 5,000 foot. The anomaly of the at 5,000 feet. But I'm going to bring up the GFS. This is for a 5-day period going into next week. So let's bring up the GFS and let's see how cold the atmosphere actually is. So we'll want the 850. That's after the storm, so you can see the freezing line at 5,000 feet goes all the way down to Savannah, Georgia. But we want to look at it a bit sooner than that, so we'll run it through the weekend and into early next week. And you can see at least through Monday, it's actually colder this time around at the 850 level. It's much colder than it was during the storm we just had. So that is certainly an interesting ingredient to think about. And I'll bring up the 2-meter temperature. Trying to see if I can get the 2-meter temperature. Put on some new plots here. Smooth contour, so you can see the 2-meter temperatures. The blue, where the 0 line is. This is at night. But even during, late Monday Sunday afternoon, the 0 line, the 30-degree line is the first blue line you see there. So it is cold enough that when precipitation is falling, that it probably would fall as wet snow. Intensity would help. If the precip is very, very light, even though it's that cold aloft, you'll probably see light rain or a mix if it's very, very light. But if you wind up getting this thing to go further west where you can get into some meaty precip on the radar, that's going to fall as snow, no question. And you'll probably have temperatures below freezing, being that if this times the way the timing looks, this would be late Monday night into Tuesday morning. And by the way, those of you who are watching from here know full well that if you've been trying to clear some of the snow, it's been like it's been the equivalent of lifting concrete. Sebastian, am I familiar with Marengo, Iowa? No, I am not. Although I am familiar with the Iowa State Fair and the fact that they love, and I've actually made this, fried butter, deep fried butter, wrapped inside a Pillsbury crescent roll. Oh my God. Let's see. Delight 777. So relieved when Lake Erie largely iced over. Now lake effect is somewhat back in play. Well, to some degree it is, depending on the positioning of if you've got a low to your northeast and you've got a strong northwest flow, you're going to have some lake effect action. That is going to go on early next week when this low goes by. There will be some lake effect when that upper low swings around down to the southeast. Yes, Shellyman Studios, fried butter. You freeze the butter and then you cut it in tabs and you wrap it inside a Pillsbury crescent roll and you deep fry it for about 2 minutes. It is amazing. Although your heart might not take too much of it, so you have to be careful. Michael Burrell, I think this is going to be snow or nothing. If it winds up being rain, it'll be a function of intensity, where maybe we just get the western fringe of light precip, and the precipitation is just not enough in intensity to get some dynamic cooling into play. Oh, Jim Beam, thank you. If you want to buy me a cigar, you You could do it by hitting the super chat button and doing it this way, or you can go on my website. There's a PayPal link, and you can do it that way. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much. And also, I mentioned this before. If you want to do this, you don't have to. If you link to Amazon, if you shop on Amazon for whatever you buy, and you link through the Amazon link on my website, then you get your stuff, and Amazon will buy me a cigar, quote unquote. So this way, everybody wins. You get your stuff, I get a cigar or a cup of coffee, and we're all happy. But please do not feel obligated to do that at all. Jason Schaefer, if it's a graze, it could be too light. Exactly, and if it's too light, it'll probably be light rain or a mix, or a little sleet or some snow pellets. It won't be anything worth getting overly excited about. It has to come back far enough west that we get into some reasonably intense precip in order for it to be a snowmaker that would produce some accumulations. It's we're at the time of year now with the absence of Arctic air. It's sort of an all or nothing situation. Either if you get the intense precip, then you get the dynamic cooling to play out, and you wind up with heavy snows like we just saw. And you get these storms that, if they're strong enough, you get heavy snows in the extreme. But if you just get these light precipitation events, you could have a cold atmosphere, but the stuff just basically melts on the way down. Will western North Carolina, Bertha Gunter, get some snow from the next system? Let me give it one more look. There will be some snow in some of the elevated areas where you are. Let me before I speak too soon, let me just give it one more check. Not impossible. Not impossible. If if this low develops the way the GFS has it, there probably will be some snow in elevated areas, western North Carolina and into southwestern Virginia. May not even have to be in elevated areas. If you get some intensity, you'll be able to cool cool the atmosphere. You've got cold air aloft going pretty far south. As the low goes by, it's going to get pulled even further south. That's one thing about blocking for you and for the southeastern part of the United States and even into Florida. Cold air gets dragged pretty far southward into the eastern part of the U.S., and it keeps temperatures below normal all the way down. So it's also going to keep spring from coming. That's for sure. Light snow on and off for Gullible's travels in northeastern PA. That's going to continue into this evening. And yes, you had it today, even though, see, this time of year, it's awfully tough not to get the temperature to get up to at least 40 during the mid and late afternoon. And that is because, hey, it's March 9th. The average high in the New York City area now is close to 50. So it's hard not to get to 40. 40 is 10 degrees below normal. Think about that. If you have a setup like this in January, for example, during the coldest part, you take off 10 degrees below normal, you're talking about highs generally in the low to mid 20s. So it's just if you want to just seasonally adjust it. So this time of year, it's hard for temperatures in the daytime not to go up to 40. The only way you keep temperatures down in the low 30s this time of year is either you have a really brutal Arctic air mass, which we don't, or you have a day with heavy precipitation like we had the other day. The GFS Awesome Gamer is not the only one. We also have the Canadian, which is very close, and some of the ensemble members of the European. The UK Met, by the way, earlier today, did have it. It's offshore, but it had it close enough where it gave a quarter to a half an inch of liquid. And the SREF model plots, the plumes during this afternoon, produced a quarter to a half an inch. And thank you, Ellen Abraham, for a cat snack. I really appreciate it. Thank you for hitting Super Chat. Thank you so much. That'll be a couple of oatmeal cookies for me, or a cup of coffee. It works. I appreciate the kind thought. Just trying to make sure I get all of your questions. You're apologizing in advance, Ellen, for any low pressure areas that you send to the lower 48. The snow lovers just want the cold air, and and rely on the Gulf of Mexico or the Atlantic to provide the moisture, but you also can provide those northern stream systems that can phase up. David Schwartz, I'm hoping by this time with the last two storms, our reservoir area. Oh yeah, the reservoirs are all full. If anything, if with the deep covered, snow-covered, snow melt and the big rains of the last 3 weeks, when that all melts, the rivers around here are going to be running pretty high for a while. The ground is beyond saturated. The moisture content of this snow was pretty high. We probably had melted about 1.5 inches to 2 inches plus of liquid in some places, and couple that with the nor'easter from the few days before, which produced 2 to 4 inch rains, and we have had substantial rains in the 3 weeks prior to that. So the ground is loaded. Salem Surveying, thank you very much. Mary Daniels, thank you very much. You're hitting Super Chat tonight. I put that together with Ellen's, and I now have I got a cigar out of it. Great, awesome. The night crawlers were light delights were out. Delight 777. Night crawlers out in the soggy grass in the evening. Where are you anyway? Where are you located? And Jim Beam, thank you so much. Now I got myself I got a good cigar, and awesome. Shelly Man Studios, you're a cigar lover. Good to hear. The snow actually had a blue tinge to it from the water content. Timothy Veltman, I had a couple of folks bring that up, that there was a hint of blue to the snow, and I have to do a little research on that, but I talked to a couple of my colleagues, and they seem to bring up the very heavy water content that was in this snowfall. Always interesting things going on. Depending on what time of year, you get all sorts of interesting things that happen. If all you got to do is just pay a little bit of attention to what the show that nature puts on, and amazing the show that we had, by the way, with the thunder snows and thunderstorms and lightning strikes that we saw in New Jersey and Long Island and in the Hudson Valley and on up points northward into southern Connecticut. Why did the GFS Euro slow the upcoming storm down, Joshua Pan? It actually didn't slow it down so much. The southern stream feature, it's actually more than one area of energy. What the models sometimes do is that when there's two short waves that are close by, it'll tend to make the first one stronger and the second one weaker, but in reality it often winds up being the reverse, where the second one is stronger and the first one is weaker. The first one gets kind of kicked out now, so models were emphasizing that first short wave a couple of days ago. That's going to be a much weaker system and a non-factor, and now putting their eggs on the second short wave behind it. That's what the models are focusing on at this point, and it does appear like it slowed it down. In reality, it overdeveloped the lead short wave and didn't develop the one behind it enough. Anthony Orr, some clues that this storm may have produced more lightning and thunder with the snow in the month of March. Very interesting. I have to tell you, at least for where I live, where on Long Island, where over the last 4 or 5 years, in the spring and summer, we've seen very few thunderstorms. I probably saw more thunderstorm activity with the snowstorm on Wednesday than I saw all of last summer. And yes, Lancaster, with this storm, the cutoff with this storm was just to the east of Lancaster in Pennsylvania. And I know there were a lot of folks in south central Pennsylvania who were big snow lovers who were really, really disappointed. But when the track of that the storm on Wednesday started translating more east, it made its most western, reached its westernmost point off the New Jersey coast. But when it started pushing eastward, that pulled the cutoff line a little bit further to the east, not by much, but enough so that if you were in that zone, instead of being, I kind of thought that maybe Lancaster would get 3 to 6, or so. I forgot what the specifics. I know the Weather Service was being fairly aggressive, and I kind of pulled back on that. But that slight shift was a huge snow killer for that part of Pennsylvania. But on the other hand, that slight eastward shift dragged all the cold air down, and then you saw the corresponding increased snowfall that occurred in parts of eastern Pennsylvania and certainly over northern New Jersey. And we had accumulating snow going all the way down into southwestern New Jersey and into Delaware. Oh, Lancaster, New York. Okay, I thought we were talking about Lancaster, PA. Chariots of fire, wind for the Delaware River. Lots of uprooted trees and damage already. Utilities only patched in many places. They're still playing catch up from the last two storms. I'm thinking that if the low stays far enough offshore, that wind will not be an issue. But we got to bear in mind that everything is so compromised now that what might have, a 30 to 40 mile an hour wind might accomplish the same thing that a 50 or 60 mile an hour wind could accomplish. But you know what? That's a short range forecast problem. Let's figure out first whether we're going to get this system to come up the East Coast close enough to bring some precip and wind, and then we'll get into the variables regarding wind, coastal flooding, and all the rest of it. Another offshore storm, even if it's offshore, it's going to kick up the ocean. Coastal flooding has been a big problem here, although thankfully with the northwest wind that's going on now, pushing the water out of the bays, it's been allowed to drain. Plus we have the first quarter moon, so we're going into the bottom of the high tide cycle here, so that's good news. At least with what happens next week. We're not doing it with a new moon. I think the new moon is next Thursday. It'll be going into the new moon, but it won't be on the actual day or the day after the new moon. So let's see what happens with all of this. So we will of course be updating you this weekend on all the goings on, whether we wind up with a third storm or not. Again, deep down inside, we want it to go away. The first two storms did just way too much, and there's still a lot of people without power. Some people have been without power since last Friday's storm, and we're not talking just a handful of people. We're talking, tens of thousands of people or more, maybe even over 100,000. I don't know what the numbers are right now in the New Jersey, Hudson Valley, Long Island area. Although the Long Island power situation has been minimal. The inland areas have really taken a big hit, especially with that heavy wet snow falling on compromised trees and utility poles and power lines. So I kind of hope it doesn't. I'm a snow lover and I understand it. We want snow lovers that can never see enough snow, but we might have to just accept the fact that we're not, that we don't get it this time around, because these folks do need help, and they got to get the power back on and get everything repaired. Okay, so let's leave it right here, folks. Have a great day, what's left of it, and enjoy your weekend. I will be live streaming this weekend, but as usual on the weekends, I'm not 100% sure of the time because I need a little bit of downtime, and I'm going to try to have a little bit of downtime. But I will get on, and I'll schedule it on the channel page so you can see what time I'll be doing it. And trying to think if there was anything else to tell you at this point. Nope. So it's almost dinner time. Have a good dinner. Have a good Friday night. We will see you tomorrow.